Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson, and this week I speak with Gillian Jones-Williams of Emerge. Now, this is an important one. The consultancy sector has a reputation for being a bit pale, male, and stale, and Gillian is an expert in diversity, equity, inclusion. She's handled some really hard-hitting cases of sexual harassment and a whole range of different issues related to people in business. We talked about everything from putting together a proper DE&I strategy. We tried to stay clear of the political conversation around diversity and how it is being eroded in terms of its importance in the workplace at the time when it needs to be given its pedestal. So, without further ado, here is my interview with Gillian Jones-Williams. Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. Gillian Jones-Williams, how are you today?
Very, very good. And thank you very much for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you today. I'm sure our listeners are going to learn a great deal listening about your journey through the world of coaching and consulting. I want to start with that, in fact. Can I ask, what inspired you to establish Emerge, and how has its mission evolved over the past 3 decades of you being in business?
Okay, well, yeah, two big questions there. And actually, the first one is a bit surprising. And it actually happened by accident. It happened because I was working for a recruitment consultancy and we had a case of sexual harassment in the office. And I happened to deal with it because the managing director was on holiday. And to cut a long story short, the person who had said the things decided to resign, which I was very happy about. I thought it was a good result. But when the managing director came back, bearing in mind it's 30 years ago, he decided to woo him back with more money because he was a big earner. And that kind of was the beginning of my interest in working with women and anti-sexual harassment. So I said to him, I can't work for an organization that condones sexual harassment. And so I got what you call bin linered, marched to my desk with a bin liner, exited off the premises in case I took any clients. But one of the clients that we'd been working on and I'd been doing a training program for, then called me directly and said, kind of, we bought you. So never forget these words. I guess you're unemployed now. And I said, well, I haven't much time to think about it, but you're absolutely right. I'm very unemployed. So they said, well, we'll contract directly with you for the training. So I had a client. I had no idea how to run a business. I had no idea how to um, invoice. I had no company name or anything like that. And that's how the business started. So
Well, how did you come up with the name, can I ask?
I didn't start as Emerge. I started as something else. And then a little bit later on, we went through a rebranding with an organization. And that's what we came up with. And it was almost like, somebody walking out of one of our programs and emerging with different behavior, with a different outlook, with different ways that they were thinking. And that's kind of where a little man sign came, because it's almost them putting their arms up in the air and going, ta-da, I'm here.
Excellent. I love that. Second part of that question then, about the evolution of that business over the years. You
Yeah,
mentioned, of course, or alluded to the climate in the office space, in the workspace, 30
yeah,
years ago, being very different to how it is
yes.
today. Or at least we like to think so, don't we? So
Well, yeah.
yeah, what are your comments? I mean, has it changed massively? I
You're
know
so right, Matt, honestly, because sometimes when I run anti-sexual harassment or inclusive workshops, people say to me, oh, surely we don't need this anymore, we're good. And I'm like, oh, yeah, actually, even more than ever, because with social media, other things that go on, and whilst it may not be as overt as it used to be, I still deal with a huge amount of cases of bullying and sexual harassment. And I've been doing a lot of work recently on the new Workers' Protection Amendment, which increases the protection of people in the workplace against sexual harassment. So the fact that we needed to amend the 2010 Act shows that it's not really improving.
And I mean, I hear about these stories still, of course. I happen to be married to an employment lawyer, and sadly,
Oh,
does
there you
get
go.
to that
Yes.
stage quite often. But and in terms of how you operate over the course of those 30 years, have you felt that you've had to sort of mold your business model, the way that you deliver,
Yeah.
and the content, of course, over that time? How has that changed for you?
Absolutely, all the time. So we've had to constantly rethink. We started very much with leadership programs, management programs, personal effective programs, and coaching. And I was one of the probably earliest adopters of coaching. But then, as time went on, we recognized that things were changing. And about 8 years ago, we really moved into DEI and specialising in diversity and equity and inclusion, and also started our women's development program, which we run globally now. And but our biggest pivot, which is etched into my brain, was on the 23rd of March 2020, as after 25 years of running the business, looking like we were going to have our best year ever, and just watching the whole business disappear when lockdown was announced, and recognizing that our clients didn't know when. They couldn't even say, well, look, let's just cancel for a couple of weeks. They had no idea. All we did then was face-to-face training and face-to-face coaching. So we then had to really change everything. And delivering training online is so different to in the workplace. You can't just say, here's the course, we'll deliver it online. We had to learn to redesign for the virtual world. We had to learn all the different platforms. And then we had to persuade our clients that it would work, because at that point, they'd all been quite resistant in the past to, can we do this online? No, it's better face to face. So everybody had to change everything really then.
Yeah, yeah, I know a great many businesses were disrupted at that time by.
Yeah,
But I guess that change that you made in the sort of business delivery, the business model, I guess that's coincided with many changes in the way that people employ. You mentioned that
yeah,
I feel like the emergence of DE&I as a concept really in recent years, because it wasn't
yeah.
top of mind for many companies, was it? And how are you finding the demand for your training, your services and coaching in that particular area? How to deal with the various different sort of variations and of issues that are coming to
Yeah.
light in that area.
You're so right. It's evolved a lot, because obviously it started with the murder of George Floyd, and then it became that that was really raising the impetus. We were doing a lot on women's development then, but over the years, things have really changed. To stop looking at DEI as initiatives and here's something we'll just plug in, or we'll do a day for this, or whatever, to really looking at inclusive cultures and what we have to do to create inclusive cultures.
Yeah.
And without getting overly political on your podcast, obviously, there's been a lot of change this year in DEI with what's happening in America. It's very disappointing change. Um, and we're still working our way around that. I'm proud to say that many British companies are standing by their DEI initiatives, but many organisations who have US parents are now beginning to say, we need to do this differently, which is disappointing. Not their fault, but it's kind of how the world has changed.
And I guess I wanted to see how our listeners might be able to adopt some new thinking in this area if it's something they've not particularly paid attention to. So, based on your experience, Gillian, what are the common obstacles that consultancies and wider companies face when implementing inclusivity strategies, and how can they overcome some of those obstacles, do you feel?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head to start with. They often don't have a strategy. Or if they have a strategy, the strategy may be being delivered by a very well meaning group of DEI people from the business who have come together because they're passionate about their own lived experience or characteristic, but don't truly understand what it takes to deliver. Company wide or even global initiatives like that. So, the first thing is to make sure that whoever is working on that is really strong on their strategy, their vision. What are we here to do? And it's not just, shall we have a resource group for something? Shall we do one thing for another thing? It's about, how do we build DEI into every conversation that we have? How do we, really look at inclusivity through the employee life cycle, from when we interview people right through to exit interviews, and how we might use information, things like that. So it's making sure that they're really holistic, and that they're also measuring it and seeing how is this really helping us.
Yeah. I think many of us would admit that the consulting sector, especially, is very male heavy, male dominant.
Yeah,
Still see that. There's gladly an emergence of
yeah,
women-led consultancies in the world, and kudos for that. But we still need to do a lot more. And you've actually delivered workshops, haven't you, on male allies for women's
yeah.
safety? How can men in business, in general, in life, how can we actively contribute to creating safer and more inclusive workplaces?
Well,
Work
firstly, thank you for that question, because this is a passion of mine. Because, it's not making men feel bad, because I completely understand that, if you haven't lived in a woman's shoes, it's impossible to truly understand on a daily basis how a woman has to live her life differently to a man. And that's kind of the first thing I would say is education. So when I talk to groups of men, it's not about, telling them they're bad and they need to be better. It's first of all understanding, what does it feel like for a woman. So, for example, a woman who's going to a conference in London, and what will they think about? They'll think about, well, I'd like to wear that dress, but maybe I need to wear a jumpsuit in case, I have to walk around late at night. I better not wear heels in case I need to run. And, when I get to the hotel, I better not ask, better ask them not to put me on a ground floor room, and then better make sure that the chain works. And I've logged all these things. And a man probably thinks about, right, I'll put my suit on, get on the train, and go up to the conference. So it's just that there are so many things that women have to think about and do differently. This is sexual safety we're talking about. When it comes to being in the workplace, there's a whole nother set of rules that women have to circumnavigate, which they need help from men. But I think the first thing that men can help with is really talking to women and understanding that male privilege is not something for them to get heightened about and think, oh, I don't have male privilege. Well, we do. Everybody has privilege in some way. And if you're given it, you're given it. And what can I do with that privilege? How can I help? So that, speaking up about women's safety, and not being somebody who colludes and turns a blind eye, because that's kind of the biggest thing I find is a lot of men will say, it's not that I'm not an ally, it's just that if I see things going on which I think are inappropriate or shouldn't happen, I probably don't intervene because I don't know what to say or how to help.
Yeah,
And it can be hard if you're in a group, and you see some inappropriate language going on, and you think, oh gosh, I'm really going to sound like the one where I go, hey guys, that's not okay. But no woman can dismantle this pyramid themselves, I'm afraid. It's like, every man needs to support.
I guess there's a high instance of unconscious ignorance in many
Yeah,
business, and it begins with, to quote Ted Lasso, "Be curious,
exactly.
ask questions, be inquisitive, find out, what are the concerns around the daily working life of your female colleagues and staff, and first seek to understand." Do you have any practical tips for that, Gillian?
All of that, all of that. And, just one other thing, and yeah, I will come to some practical tips as well. All of that. And one other thing that I heard, I was working with the police. We were doing some work, very public work for Scottish Rugby. And they ran a campaign called Don't Be That Guy. And they had videos playing at every one of their matches. And throughout this, we did some workshops with the team and the Scottish police. And one of the things I discovered was that the biggest users of porn nowadays are 12 to 18-year-old boys. And that's because it's so easily accessible on their phones, and also because sex education is so woefully poor at school. And that's quite, again, when we say, has it got better? That's one of the things that makes it worse, because they would then show these videos to girls who may think, well, this is how it should be. And then you get Andrew Tate coming into the equation, and there's a real fear for and the adolescence program that came up really for young boys and what they're being exposed to. So I guess number one is that if you're a parent of young children, really make sure that you're having those conversations, that you're educating them and talking to them about it, as uncomfortable as they are. And I think a lot of parents think that's a bit of an uncomfortable discussion to have.
I think
But
that's
but
that's a
tips,
that's a vital skill, isn't it, in business, to be able to
yes,
have those difficult conversations because in a variety of different facets and a variety of different areas of business, they will be required at some
yeah.
stage.
Yeah. And, and I think this is the whole point. It's all about uncomfortable conversations because I work on the belief that nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, who can I go and hurt or offend or upset today? Apart from the small percentage of people, who are very dangerous. So therefore, when somebody does something which upsets or offends somebody, they probably don't realize that they were doing it. And when I worked on the #MeToo campaign, the solicitors gave me a framework, and it was clumsy, creepy, and criminal. And it's a really useful framework, I think, for organisations to look at because a lot of the time people have just been clumsy. They didn't understand that word was offensive or that saying was offensive, or maybe the banter had gone too far or something like that. But watching whether it's moving into the creepy or to the criminal. And I handle cases every week where sometimes I'm asked to do sensitivity training with people who've gone to final written warning. Um, Evidence hasn't quite been there for them to be exited from the company, but they need to ensure that these people don't understand it. And even then, when I go to have conversations with them, there's still an element of the people saying, I really don't understand. I thought we had a great relationship and I thought we had good banter and we could say anything to each other. So I don't understand why suddenly they didn't like it or reported it.
Yeah, and I guess it's about calling out at the clumsy stage and at the creepy stage, so that the criminal doesn't ever become an issue. It's about that not making sure that tolerance isn't there, or that recognition of clumsy is
Yes.
called out, is acted upon. It's the nipping in the bud, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. And zero tolerance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because what you get in a lot of organizations, you get the power issue where there are lots of people who've either been there a long time, get paid a lot of money, are critical to the company, and who may be preying on younger, newer women who are fearful for their jobs. And these people think, well, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody's going to fire me. I might get a written warning, but I'm not going to get fired.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, that power matrix really comes into it, I think.
I think that's an important discussion to have. I want to return to diversity and inclusion
Yes.
initiatives, Gillian. And when it comes to companies implementing those, um, what have you seen some of these good strategies we spoke about, inclusion strategies? They are quite popular, of course, but those that look good on paper,
Yeah.
perhaps that but consistently fail in practice. What have you seen out in the wider space?
I think, as I started to allude to earlier, those who will be including inclusivity into everything that they do. So, if there is a training program for new managers, line managers, etc., inclusivity is mentioned there and it's brought into it. It's how do you manage a diverse team? What do you do? If there is a how to recruit or a hiring program, that program says, here's part of how to interview. But you look at traditional interviewing programs and they will have a session on how to deal with difficult candidates. Well, they're probably not difficult at all. They're maybe neurodiverse. I'm neurodiverse myself. And so just because somebody doesn't talk in a very fluid way, or it's more difficult to get information out of them, doesn't mean that they're not a good candidate. Are they neurodiverse? How is your workplace set up? So here's one thing I heard, which I thought was amazing, particularly for people who are recruiting, and they know that a level of their population would be neurodiverse because, say, they have a lot of analysts or engineers or creatives who are far more likely to be neurodivergent in some way. And for autistic people. Often the unknown can be very, very unsettling. So what they did was they went to reception with a camera and they videoed all of the space. They walked through to the interviewing room. They videoed the interviewing room so that they could send it not just to, because they don't know if anyone's autistic or has other neurodivergent characteristics, but they just send it out to everyone now to say, just to let you know what to expect. This is our environment. This is where we interview. This is what it'd be like. And that's wonderful, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just kind of accepting that, you know, this might be it. There used to be this thing about, surprising people with questions and things like that. But good organizations will now send the questions that they're going to ask out to everybody and will be so skilled at interviewing that they don't mind that people have prepared the answers. They can probe into it rather than going, let me ask you a question that will put you on the spot and surprise you, and then I'm going to judge you on whether or not, what you do in that circumstance. So, you know, and this is what I mean by keeping this in there. But I think also the good companies are where senior leaders and other people are vulnerable and they talk about their own issues that they have experienced within inclusivity. And that could be anything from if they hadn't had privilege, if they are neurodivergent, if they potentially are LGBTQI and had concerns about coming out in certain organizations. So, having sessions where they talk about it vulnerably, I think really helps. I'm sorry, I really went for it there, didn't I? Because
Welcome
very
to it.
passionate about that.
Yeah, and what I love about those ideas, the recording of the path to the interview room, the questions before, they're so simple to execute.
Yeah.
There's such simple ideas, but make a huge difference to those kind of candidates. Gillian, do you still think, and maybe you know this from your experience of working with organizations, that the idea of diversity is actually quite narrow for a lot of businesses, that they're perhaps thinking of gender and race, not necessarily about neurodivergence, gender fluidity, disability, those kinds of things. Has that been your experience?
Um, yes and no. I think that Um, most organisations that we speak to now will be looking at the breadth of it. So they will be including all sorts of different diversities and different lived experiences in what they do. Um, if you look at what happened with diversity in the US, and I said I'll try and keep right at the side of not being too political, that was very much, I think, based on race. Um, and the idea of, well, it needs to be a meritocracy and we've gone too far with this. I think that's where they took it from because they started looking at universities and things and say, well, now they're all full of people who are like Stanford, the majority of people are now black because we've done this. And so I think they were looking at it much more from a racial perspective rather than. So at no point when I've heard people in the US say we need to get rid of our DEI initiatives has disability, neurodivergence been mentioned. Quite a lot about women, quite a lot about race. So I
Yeah.
think you're right.
What's again in your vast experience, Gillian, what's the most common excuse that senior leaders give for not making real progress on this issue of
No
it?
budget, without question. And they often go, we really want to do something on diversity, but there's no budget. And I think that's because perhaps it's being presented to them more as a really good and nice thing to do, as opposed to competitive advantage. And therefore, in doing that, um, the budget isn't found because if you can truly show people, if you do this, if you have a diverse team, there's loads of stats which will show that they can increase profits. It's all out there. Deloitte's people like that do great um, stats on that. And but they don't really give managers much training on how to manage diverse teams. And traditionally, if we look back, it's so easy, isn't it, for somebody to recruit somebody based on they're a bit like me. So I think this is going to be great. I've now got a team of clones, and that's really easy to manage because we all like the same thing. We all think the same ways, and we do that. And so in previous years, I don't think people had recognized the importance of diversity of thought, representing the demographic of the customer within the team. Um, for example, in sports, I won't mention which sports because, as well as rugby, I've worked in a lot. I once had a debate about people who were saying, we're really struggling to get women into the game, and we don't really understand why that is. And I said, could it be because you're trying to solve that problem with a group of middle-aged men? And maybe if you invited some women into the discussion, and by the way, there are some women who are running your clubs who are really finding it very easy to attract women. Let's just get that diversity of thought in there.
Yeah, interesting. I think there's lots to sort of unpack with that, of course, but I know that you work extensively with women in leadership as well.
Yeah.
What are some of the persistent myths and stereotypes that you see holding women back still in this day and age?
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to make one slight point on this. We run a Rise Women's Empowering Program, and we don't actually call it a leadership program because I think if you run a leadership program for a group, whether that's women or ethnic minorities or black people or whatever you do, you're suggesting they're too deficient to go on the kind of company-wide program with everybody else. So, a leadership program is a leadership program. But what women need, and we also run Rise for Men as well, because we've realised that men need an exclusive space as well, is that there are discussions that they want to have, whether those be about hormones, about guilt, about childcare, about working in male-dominated environments that are holding them back. Which, if we had men in the room, they wouldn't have the same type of discussions. And, there's a real prevalence that comes out of limiting beliefs, confidence, not getting their voice heard in the workplace, and all of those things that we talked about earlier that allies can help with. And so those are the themes that come through on women's development that we're dealing with. Not enough visibility, and women really don't like networking at all. Some do, but very few women will put their hand up and go, "Oh, I love networking," and not realizing that this is a very, very important point of getting their career really kind of rocket fueled. Men have different ways of networking. So men are much likely to go, should we go for a drink after work? Do you fancy a game of golf? Do you want to do this? And they don't even see that as networking. Whereas the women are probably rushing back home or, don't want to go into a pub on their own really. So miss those opportunities.
I'm conscious that we've used that word ally a couple of times so far, Gillian, and I think we explored the idea, of course, of men in leadership, understanding women's situation, using that inquisitiveness, of course. But what does allyship look like for you? What would you like to see more of from men in business in that respect?
Yeah. So I think that men can be an ally in many different ways. They can be a supporter. We've talked about somebody who intervenes when things aren't going on. They can be a supporter, an advocate, a champion for women. So it may well be that if a man is asked to speak on a panel and he looks at the panel and he thinks, why are there no women on there? He goes and asks that question and says, should we have one? I know a good one who will come. Maybe they offer to co-author work and get a woman's name on it for visibility. Maybe if they're in a meeting, just in the simplest way, and they hear a woman being talked over or her idea being hijacked. I do recognise it happens to men, but a lot of the time to women, they actually say, wasn't that this person's idea? Should we just go back and hear some more from them? Or they can be a confidant. They can check in with them after the meeting and say, you were very quiet there. Were you okay? And help them. So there's many different roles I think that men can play as allies.
I smiled as you said that you mentioned the panel there, Gillian, because I spoke on a panel just this Monday, just gone, and it's being recorded on a Wednesday for the listeners' benefit. And actually, the lineup was four men, and a woman was added in the days coming up to the event. I was quite thankful for that, but
Yeah.
still had to ask the question why it was such a lopsided panel, even in that instance.
Yeah.
And we're talking about this was a general business marketing event, so there's no good reason why
No.
it should favour any one particular
Yeah.
gender identity. But yeah, it's interesting to see that. It is about obviously calling out those situations.
And whilst there are disappointing stats and things around, there is some encouragement. I recently was asked to speak on a panel at Chelsea Football Club when they launched their Women Empowerment Network, and 50% of that audience there, I don't know how many, 150, were men. It was really encouraging to see so many men on that audience.
I guess that's the kind of support that you're talking
Yeah.
about, and
Visible support,
representation.
turning up and
Absolutely.
asking great questions about how they could be allies.
Wonderful. All of this, I'm conscious, impacts on culture, doesn't it, Gillian? What's
Yeah.
one underestimated lever, if you will, for real culture change that you wish more companies, more consultancies would adopt?
I think it's truly understanding the concept of psychological safety. Because, so many people are afraid to bring their authentic self to work and are masking or hiding. And I would say for probably 24 years of my career, I was masking. And that's because my mother was chronically bipolar. I inherited low grade of bipolar. I would never have dared to have spoken about that until about 5 or 6 years ago because I thought clients would run a mile, wouldn't want to deal with me, would be worried about the consequences. So, I had to mask a lot of that. And I know there are so many people who talk to me and say, I can't take my real self to work because I don't feel safe enough to be me. But wouldn't it be wonderful in a culture if people just could be authentically them and somebody could say, this is me, this is my religion, and somebody could say, interesting. It's not my belief, but I'm interested to hear about yours. And there was never that underlying fear to challenge or to show up in any way.
Interesting. Can I ask, have you ever walked away from a client or a project because their commitment to diversity was so surface level that it didn't align with your own sort of expectations, Gillian?
We certainly have had to have some very courageous conversations about whether they really want to do something. So I wouldn't say we've walked away from them, but we've probably come to a mutual conclusion that it wasn't the right time for them, particularly when the topic of budget comes up, and it's like, well, searching for pound coins down the back of a sofa. We really want to do this, but anything, but I don't think you really do want to do this because if you did, you'd be looking at that. So yeah, and there have been things that we've been asked to do in the past which have felt like an isolated knee-jerk reaction to something, and we have known that they will not go down well. Um, it happened once, obviously many years ago, back in 2020, when a white managing director took it upon themselves to host a session talking about white privilege and what was happening with the world and what black people were going through. And we just knew that wasn't going to go down well, even though it was really well intentioned. And we did advise against it, but it happened, and that's what went on.
Some of this just smacks of it. It sounds like an episode of The Office, doesn't it? Sometimes when you hear these stories,
Yeah.
but they still happen.
Sometimes you do just sit there go, like, okay, all right.
Yes, that idea of being tone deaf to these things.
Yes.
Um, Lastly, Gillian, what are some of the less obvious forms of exclusion that still persist? Sorry, in organisations as progressive as they may be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is still some covert stuff that goes on. And I still feel that for women, for example, you've only got to look at the stats of how many women are in really senior positions.
Mm.
Now, obviously, there's not a real, okay, we're not going to employ them. Although one person did say to me, one CEO once said to me, Gillian, we've got some really good organisation people in our organisation, women who we brought up through the ranks, and we'd love to promote them to the board, but they don't have any experience. And my words, were probably in a nicer way than this. Where do you think they're going to get that experience? And so um, there is a real lack of women in senior positions. It's not in every type of organisation. So there's certain genres where there are far more women, but in a lot of the organisations that we deal with, and we deal with some defence companies, heavy defence companies, and engineering, and they know that this is an issue, and they get to a certain level. And one of the things, when you say one of the kind of hidden ones that they're not really dealing with, is menopause, and recognizing how many good women are leaving during that period of sort of 50 to 60, or not getting promoted, and recognizing the support that they need. And the same with maternity, and the bringing women back from maternity, and the very carefully rearranging their roles so that the women are very grateful that they could accept that role, not realizing the impact it was going to have on their later career.
Yeah, that's amazing. Gillian, that's been massively inspiring to me. Very, very interesting. I feel I need to kind of question my own sort of actions and plans for a more diverse workforce in the future. I'm glad to say I've got, apart from me, 100% female workforce at least. It has prompted me to be more inquisitive and more sort of questioning, and so thank you for that. And I hesitate to mention our next feature, given your expertise in the area of sexual harassment and what have you. But our next feature that we finish with is Snog, Marry, Avoid. And, but it's in the context of business.
I'm all up for fun.
So a snog is a quick win in business. And this can be either from your position as a business owner, of course, or something that you see in business for the kind of clients that you work with. What's a quick win that you would advocate businesses really adopt as quickly as possible?
I think really trust in the power of your people and tap into what they've got. And they really will deliver for you, when you give them the space to do that. So, don't be so cautious that I'm the only one who can do this, or this is the only way it can be done, that you don't allow people to do things differently because you'll be afraid. Am I supposed to do one word?
No, that's fine. Marry is something that you would implement for the long term, something that needs to be a permanent fixture in business, you feel?
I think I'm going to say two because I think they're inextricably linked, and that is vision and values, is making sure that the values that are completely linked to the vision are laid out to the company, and the company are involved in looking at what behaviours would mean we were living those values. Because I think without vision, values, and behaviours aligned, the best type of strategy will just not get achieved. So that's kind of what culture is built up of.
Excellent. And avoid, if you needed guidance on this, was what would you ditch from business that perhaps you didn't ditch quick enough, but think doesn't belong?
Yeah, micromanagement.
Oh,
I hear it all the time from people when I talk about, tell me about a poor leader that you've had. It will be somebody who micromanaged. And whilst I didn't necessarily micromanage, and that links to my first part there, I was always terrified of letting go. And it's only when I learnt to let go that I realised how wonderful it is, how freeing, and how wonderful for other people it is when you let go.
I love that. Gillian, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Consultancy Edge today. I've learned an incredible amount. It's been more inspiring than scary, I think, from this white male. So thank you so much for being with us today, and yes, all the very best in business.
Thank you so much for having me.